Good evening. I'm Bad Place Alone, and I'm here to talk about serial killers. Serial killers are usually deeply disturbed individuals who kill several people with a cooling off period between the murders. The term comes from the German Serienmörder, coined as far back as 1930 by legendary Berlin investigator Ernst Gennett. But the term was perhaps popularized in English by FBI Special Agent Robert Ressler as late as 1974. Every nation on the planet has suffered who knows how many of these individuals from who knows how far back. It isn't clear just how much of a recent phenomenon serial killing is, or if it relates to wider cultural influences, but I do know they're just as much in the history books as they are walking around today. The majority of the time, the victims had no prior relationship with the killer, and the motive for the murders is utterly alien to most of us. Some kill for some kind of material profit, others are psychotic. Some kill as a twisted mission, and others kill for some kind of emotional or sexual or sadistic gratification, and they kill anywhere from 2 to hundreds of people. My mission is to study these serial killers and make a series of videos about what I've learned. I thought about doing this for a while and eventually thought, why not see what this YouTube thing feels like? I've been a true crime buff since my teens, and although cult leaders frighten me more and kidnappers disgust me more, it's serial killers that dominate centre stage for both me and all of true crime. I think it's because serial killers represent something, but I can't tell you exactly what. I'm sure others with such a morbid fascination share my confusion. Maybe it's an opportunity to look at something profoundly foreign. Serial killers and the minds behind their eyes are so different from our own we can't help but be intrigued by them. Legal and biological definitions aside, they're not human. Maybe looking at these people will help us to identify dangerous people in our lives and communities. Can we study the worst of humanity in order to protect the best? It's possible we've already had encounters with this type of person, and want to minimise these encounters going forward, if we can. Maybe we're drawn to these people so we can learn and understand why they did what they did, be it to us or someone we've never met to whom we feel we can have some compassion for. That's one school of thought. But maybe we're not so different. Maybe we can grow to even understand ourselves and what we're truly capable of. Exploring true crime in general is a safe way to examine what Carl Jung called the shadow, in a way of understanding what true malevolence is. Maybe we can't look away from serial killers because we see ourselves in them, a dark manifestation of something our uncivilized subconscious desires. Something we relate to in ways we'd never admit, maybe not even to ourselves. Maybe even goes so far as envy. Though we may decry serial killers as evil monsters, does a part of us only do so out of resentment? They've broken some of the most basic cross-culture rules, and yet they have a freedom we'll never have. There's also the power and infamy, a certain level of dark prestige, and easy celebrity. The price is life imprisonment or execution if you're caught, but can you get away with it? What does that feel like? And more importantly, what does it feel like on a fundamental level to take a life? Most of us will never know, and it's very taboo to even talk about it, let alone the other things these predators have done. Perhaps the opposite of that is true, and we can't handle serial killers and their crimes at all. And maybe we even fetishize such nightmares so we can process them. Are we interested in serial killers as some sort of mental masochism? A way to punish ourselves for the crimes of the most abhorrent? Or a misguided attempt to be edgy? Or maybe the reason we're fascinated by these individuals is much less ambiguous. Maybe we want to vicariously explore their deeds, and maybe we're just too much of a coward to go out and find out what it's really like to kill. What are we in the dark? How well do you really know that figure in the mirror? What is a human? What is our inner world? The best answer I can provide is diverse. Our lives are, if not special, certainly unique. Let's take basic personality. The introvert, who prefers to spend time alone, and the extrovert, who prefers socializing, have radically different inner worlds to each other. Both are human, both are alien to each other. Personality is just one aspect. Some of us are compassionate, others competitive, some workaholics, some relaxed. What about those who are creative against those who aren't? What sort of inner worlds do they have? What sort of lives do they live? It still blows my mind that most people don't have an inner monologue, no inner voice narrating their lives. I can't imagine what that must be like. Then there are more obvious external differences between humans. Culture, nationality, race, gender, sexuality, wealth, and the epoch in which they live. And then there's trauma. Some people live uneventful and lucky lives. Others had lives mired in tragedy. Look at the entire pantheon of mental illnesses. What you see is still human, but never universal. So, I don't know what a human is. However, I feel confident in saying that the cases I intend to study are far beyond any scope of an internal world for most. Types of psychopath, schizophrenically criminally insane, sadistic without hesitation or remorse. The act of doing these things is not the human condition, and it's so otherworldly that the perpetrators have less in common with any of us than we do with any other race, creed, class, personality, or madness in the world. I still don't know why I have this compulsion, and I wouldn't dream to presuppose why anyone else does, but I'm still determined to figure something out. It's just regrettable I don't know what that something is. So, I've embarked on a project. I'm going to study 100 serial killer cases to explore any common themes in their details, history, motives, and the perpetrator's mental health. How will this 100 be selected? I'm going to extract the most notorious and well-known serial killers first and foremost, and do my own original research into however many others to round out the list. I want to avoid conformity bias and as such stick to what makes a serial killer, as opposed to what makes a good headline. But naturally I have to discuss those that have gotten the most attention. And the serial killers that get the most attention typically come from the United States. Although there are plenty of entries from Canada, Australia, and my own United Kingdom, America is a much bigger country. It's natural that the English-speaking world is the world I have the most data on and the most exposure to. Over half of the 100 were born and operated within the USA. Why so many Americans? I couldn't say for sure. Better documentation? Does their society quote-unquote celebrate murderers in a way others don't? It's grossly unfair to penalise America because all our nations have serial killers in them, and we all have a shameful and violent past. But for whatever reason, the lion's share of the list belongs to Uncle Sam. With my list of 100, what will I be talking about? Amongst other things, I want to talk about the intelligence and the mental health of the killer, as well as any known or theorised mental health disorders. I feel the need to stress that I am not a mental health professional. I have no relevant qualifications, and I am just a tourist, a fellow traveller just like you. Nevertheless, I intend to report on what the experts have reported on to see what it tells us. I'll talk about several things. Firstly, Factor 1 psychopathy, a pattern of behaviour that revolves around goal orientation, superficial charm, grandiosity, lacking emotional reactance, and being manipulative. I'll also talk about Factor 2 psychopathy, which is geared more towards impulsivity, contumaciousness, emotional dysregulation, criminal versatility, and recklessness. Both Factor 1 and Factor 2 tend to be lacking in remorse, empathy, and guilt, and both are prone to boredom. Some reports suggest these are brain disorders, and as such are innate, but dormant without corresponding abuse during the formative years, but I don't know for sure. The parts of the brain known as the amygdala and prefrontal cortex are often discussed in exploration of psychopathy. Some even say secondary psychopaths do in fact feel empathy and emotions. Again, I'm not qualified to say anything definitively. With regards to brain disorders, schizophrenia will be discussed in relation to some killers, which usually manifests as psychosis of some sort. Then there are the cluster B personality disorders, the erratic dramatic cluster, to use perhaps an archaic classification. Personality disorders are generally inherited, but I get the impression that most of the time it's a case of nurture rather than nature in these cases. Antisocial personality disorder is heavily likened to Factor II psychopathy, but they are distinct mental disorders as far as I can tell, although they could practically be twins. ASPD involves juvenile delinquency and/or what's called conduct disorder in children, and is further characterized by callousness, irresponsibility, open hostility, and behavioral problems. Besides having a lot of overlap with Factor II psychopathy, there is also a small overlap with Factor I psychopathy. Antisocial personality disorder and Factor II psychopathy are often called sociopathy, and sociopathy is also considered synonymous with psychopathy, which is what's usually called Factor I psychopathy. It gets very confusing. So yes, I'm oversimplifying, and to the 12 people who will actually watch this rubbish, I hope you know to take it with the pinch of the finest salt. There's another theory that says psychopath is innate/nature, and sociopath is learned/nurture. But I don't think I agree with this assessment, but what do I know? Ultimately, I think the term sociopathy is colloquial and redundant, so I won't be using it in this project to minimise confusion. Then there is narcissistic personality disorder. NPD is characterised by entitlement, arrogance, attention-seeking behaviour, pathological envy, and extreme grandiosity. It's linked with Factor I psychopathy, but these two are very distinct mental disorders. I'm fairly sure it's a myth that all psychopaths are narcissists, and on this I have considerable confidence. All psychopaths are somewhat narcissistic, but to truly be a narcissist is to conform to a very specific pathology. There is comorbidity, yes, but I don't want to conflate the two. And still, there are theories that the grandiose presentation of narcissism is indeed Factor I psychopathy, and the compensatory model of narcissism is the true narcissism, but again, I wouldn't really know. There is also borderline personality disorder. BPD is characterized by intense emotional instability, abandonment anxiety, a poor sense of self, and feelings of emptiness. BPD is linked with Factor II psychopathy, especially when someone with BPD is put in a state of stress. I'll talk about other brain and personality disorders as and when they come up, but these ones will be discussed the most. My interest is not just in serial killer psychology, though. I'll be focusing on the trauma history and the employment history of the perpetrator, as well as focusing on the nature of the crime and what it says about them. I hope to get the information I present to be as accurate as possible, but sadly, I will get things wrong. I'm not joking. It's a guarantee that there will be a lot of things that are incorrect in this presentation, despite my best efforts. Getting information on these cases and sorting fact from fiction is going to be very difficult. Mental health and trauma history? Even the number of victims for almost all of these killers is questionable, and sources vary wildly. I'll do my best to be cautious as I go. After all, websites copy other websites, and false information goes around and around. Also in my journey, I will pick out certain heroes of the cases, people that crossed paths with the killer and survived, or even helped lead to their capture. I know I'll be talking about John Douglas and the aforementioned Robert Ressler many times due to their work in profiling, but there are many other heroic people to counteract all that we're about to explore. Throughout this project, I'm going to try to avoid passing judgment on the various serial killers. I'll also try to avoid mawkish sentimentality over the victims. Neither are helpful and both are inane and banal, but there will be several times where I break both these rules. I'm sure you understand. What I mean is, calling serial killers pejorative adjectives is redundant. Evil, sick, twisted, monster. All of these are likely accurate, but they should go without saying. And they go without saying because there are so many of these people that passing judgment like this will take a very long time. So I'll try to stay as neutral as possible. Another reason I have a problem regarding comments about how evil and sick a killer or killers are is the worry that just around the corner there's a case that's even worse. And what can you say about this eviler case that you haven't already said? You've used up your beefiest adjectives and now a case has left you speechless. Language gets trivialized. Don't fall for this trap because your sanity may well depend on it. A monster is a toddler who spills his juice. A scumbag is someone shouting too loud in a pub. A douche is a tool for washing a vagina, a useless, unneeded consumer tool that might make the problem worse, but that's beside the point. I'm not talking about monsters, or scumbags, or douches. I'm talking about murderers, rapists, arsonists, paedophiles. Theirs is several league tables below what most of us will ever have to deal with. And this is as good a place as any to say the cases I intend to cover are extremely graphic, and will be upsetting to most people. Warnings like this can be viewed as patronising, but it really can't be overstated with whatever word you want to use how bad it is. I won't mince words or pull any punches simply because there's so much to get through. Consider this the warning. There are thousands of these cases. I want a clean 100 sample size, so I need to be very selective. There are not enough hours in the day to go over everyone I want to go over, and as a result I'm going to skip over almost as many as I intend to cover. I'll start by cutting any killer who's not been caught. I am particularly interested in the mental health and trauma history of serial killers, and I want to know the nuances of their lives. Nuances we don't have access to if they've never been interviewed or at least studied. So, the Axeman of New Orleans, the Zodiac Killer, the Doodler, the Monster of Florence, the Atlanta Ripper, the Cleveland Torso Murderer, and, of course, Jack the Ripper, will not be covered by me. There's simply way too much to discuss, and it's mostly related to the crime, not the criminal. In addition, I don't want to look at more historic serial killers, such as 15th and 16th century figures like Giles de Rez, Peter Nears, and Elizabeth Bathory. It's even harder to sort fact from fiction from cases so old, because the records are even more unreliable. I extend this skepticism to other killers from the 19th and very early 20th century. It was a different world, and what little I find will not be as relevant as looking at the bulk of serial killers from the early 21st century and the post-war period. I've lost some interesting names as a result. Lizzie Borden, H. Holmes, Hajid Mesferi, and Bella Kiss have all been cut. Kiss, though identified, was never caught, so he's excluded twice. The story of H. Holmes in particular has been blown up to the size of myth, and a lot of it is untrue. Included in the growing list of exclusion is a trio of cannibalistic German serial killers, Karl Denke, Karl Grossman, and Fritz Hamann from the early 20th century. And while we're on the subject of trios, 19th century American poisoners Lydia Sherman, Jane Topham, and Belle Gunness are also all disqualified. A shame because they're all fascinating, but I can't study everyone. Finally, the notorious Delphine Lalaurie will also need to be overlooked in favour of time, and the fact that Vera Renzi probably didn't exist means she's out as well. But in my excluding of the very old, I also need to cut some of the very new. I'm going to omit anyone captured after 2015, because new information may be brought to light, and thus make me liable for peddling false information, more than I might already be doing. I want the dust to be settled, as it can be, before I dissect these cases. I really hate to do this. I want to study the modern serial killer, so taking out some of the more recent cases is counterproductive. But then again, the ones I will study have, for some reason or another, proved that they have survived the test of time, and have something to contribute to true crime discourse. I appreciate that's a very weak justification, but I need to make my cuts. So Elizabeth Wetlauffer and Tamara Samsonova will not be featured in this project. Lucy Letby is currently on trial, and Daniela Poggiali was acquitted of the charges against her. It also occurs to me that between these four, the 19th century American poisoners trio I've overlooked, and the likes of Borden and Lalaurie, I've inadvertently removed almost half of all noteworthy female serial killers from the shortlist. I honestly didn't mean to. But that's not to say only women have been excluded from modern times. Stephen Port, James Dale Ritchie, Bruce MacArthur and Todd Colehep have also been removed lest over the next 5 years or so more comprehensive documentaries or books are released about them, and from these I'll harvest the information we need. But there's still far too many, so I go back to my mission statement and ask myself, what exactly is a serial killer? Or rather, what isn't? Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow, though prolific murderers with 13 kills, were motivated by material gain and not the murders themselves, at least not to the extent that I want to study. I'm going to study serial killers that killed for cash, but correct me if I'm wrong, I get the impression that Bonnie and Clyde murders were incidental, secondary to their goal, which was more about robbing banks. Although their gang might well be responsible for glamorizing the American outlaw, I don't see much value in studying them, and I'm sure most people wouldn't consider them serial killers in the truest sense. If anything, I'm more interested in the cop that was chasing them, Frank Hammer. It's for the reason of motivation that gangsters, mobsters, bandits and contract killers are out, so the likes of James Bulger, who killed at least 19, won't be discussed here. Perhaps it's because the criminal world has its own rules, separate from our own, but the world of a rogue serial killer can overlap very well with non-criminal life. But where does one draw the line for this study? I'm reluctant to talk about political murderers, so Theodore Kaczynski isn't going to be considered. He's just too different, using such an impersonal and indiscriminate weapon as explosives. I view him as a terrorist with a clear political agenda first, and a serial killer second. To focus the study, I'm cutting Charles Manson. He is also a completely different breed and will throw me off my goal. He didn't kill anyone and has his own category, cults. And yes, the likes of Whitechapel Berg, Ashura Hara, Koresh Throat, Constanzo, Ervil LeBaron, and of course Jim Jones and all of their followers aren't being considered in my project either, though I'm sure some would qualify. And it should go without saying that I am more interested in the hands-on serial killer, so infamous dictators also don't count, Hitler, Stalin, Pol Pot, Mao, Suharto Khan, etc. To study any one of them would take up more time and research than 100 serial killers combined. Where do I draw the line? Shall I do a study of the likes of Oscar Delvanger? In spite of all of this, I'm still hundreds over my limit. So now I ask more specifically, what exactly is a serial killer? Amongst other things, it's someone who kills multiple people with a significant cooling off period between the murders. So infamous single victim killers are excluded. Thompson and Venables, Lisa Montgomery, Jodi Arias, Issei Sagawa, Catherine Knight, Alyssa Bustamante, Stephen McDaniel, Luca Magnotta, and hundreds more. All are worth studying, but not here. This also includes killers who were only convicted of one kill, or should I say, only one confirmed kill. So Paul Bateson, John Collins, Gilbert Jordan, and even Tommy Lynn Sells are all out, even though they almost certainly killed more than one. This also includes David Parker Ray, who wasn't actually convicted of murder at all, although he may well have killed more than 50 people. But how many does one need to kill in order to be considered a serial killer? Some criminologists or national jurisdictions or even historical periods place the number as low as 2, others as high as 5. Although I'm going to overlook a lot of particularly interesting cases, some I know a lot about, I'm going to push the number to a minimum of 5 confirmed murders as my definition of a serial killer for this project. I can afford to be that picky. So, Jody Ibarra, Ed Gein, Joseph Condra, Mary-Beth Tinning, Russell Williams, Mary Bell and many others are all out due to a kill count of only 2 by most accounts. Gary Heidnik is also not going to be explored in detail. In my quest for honesty and purity, I'm also overlooking both Wayne Williams and Gerard Schaefer, even though it seems very likely that these two have more than just a pair of deaths to their name, and actually may be over 20 for both of them. But I can't in good conscience cater to hearsay and theories, even though they, as well as the boozing barber and the coast-to-coast killer, have almost certainly killed more. Now killers with 3 confirmed kills are eliminated. Vlado Teneski, Israel Keys, Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka, Levi Belfield, Robert Rhodes and Albert Fish amongst others. You can bet I really want to discuss those, but this is not the time. Finally, 4 kills are also not enough to make it to my study of 100. Jerry Budos, Beverly Allett, Tatsuma Miyazaki, William Hance, John Cooper, Gordon Northcott and Kristen Gilbert, all cut. I considered cutting duos, groups and the depressingly high number of killer couples. There is something cultish about some of the groups after all, but I think these instances can teach us something, and instead I lump them together as one case. It might be more accurate to say I'm studying a series of murders rather than the individual or individuals that perpetrate them, if you're so inclined to be that pedantic. It's actually surprising how many of these people had willing accomplices in one form or another, and it also forces me to ask where I draw the line in what is and isn't an accomplice to murder. I still have far too many killers on my plate. It really is a horrible world. Well, let's go back and examine the definition, specifically the cooling off period part, with the intention of weeding out spree killers. I don't know how long exactly a cooling off period needs to be, but given a lot of kill sprees kill in one day, those should be ruled out. Joanna Dennehy, Jasmine Richardson and Jeremy Steinkel, Brian Blackwell and Zufar Robert Garrow all had less than 5 confirmed kills anyway. Some definitions of serial killers will exclude killing family members and insist the victim have little to no prior acquaintance with the attacker, and some of those did kill family members. I don't feel the need to make that exclusion, and I will explore some who did kill family members. John List killed 5 family members, but he's discounted on the grounds of being a spree killer, and not because of the massive familicide. Also, over half of the listed females have now been excluded from the project. I honestly didn't mean to, that's just how the chips lie. Richard Speck is a spree killer or rampage killer, and I'm tired of him being lumped in with serial killers. Andrew Cunanan spaced out his 5 murders more, April the 27th to July the 15th, but ultimately I consider him a spree killer as well, and the same applies to the Neptroviskov maniacs. They killed a staggering 21 people in 2 months. Are we there yet? No, not quite. I'm sorry. We're close, but I'm making one very last controversial decision. I've removed the big 4 most well-known serial killers from my analysis. Richard Ramirez, Jeffrey Dahmer, John Wayne Gacy, and of course Theodore Bundy. There are countless books and documentaries on these ones in particular, and most true crime buffs will be familiar with these individuals and their sordid legacy. This isn't to say I won't discuss these 4, but I will do so in the context of other killers that are similar to them in some way. These comparative studies will also extend to the 50 plus I have already cut from the project, to give us all an idea of other cases I will pull from and examine. I now have my list of 100 serial killers. All of them have at least 5 confirmed murders, been active between 1915 and 2015, the vast majority of the dead having no prior acquaintance with the killer, and the murders have a reasonable cooling off period between them. What on earth have I gotten myself into? Let's get started.